The satisfying crunch of expensive leather shoes against Marcus's imported Italian tile floors echoed through his restaurant as I strode toward his VIP table. His face paled when he spotted me. I smiled, placing the official-looking document beside his plate where his investors could see. A bill for tonight's special. Your diners seem to love my grandmother's seafood paella recipe. The one you swore you created. My newly trademarked flavor profile detection system had counted exactly 43 servings tonight. That's $4,300 plus interest. I smoothed my designer blazer, feeling the weight of my recorder in the pocket. Should I explain to your investors how you acquired your signature dish, or would you prefer to settle this privately? 3 years earlier, my life had been so different. I was Sophia Vidal, a line cook with big dreams and bigger naivety. Steam fogged my glasses as I carefully measured saffron threads for my grandmother's seafood paella in my tiny apartment kitchen. The aromatic mixture of garlic, tomatoes, and peppers simmering in olive oil filled the space with memories of her teaching me this recipe, her hands guiding mine over the wide, shallow pan. "This is incredible," Marcus said, wrapping his arms around my waist and kissing my neck. The sensation sent shivers down my spine, momentarily distracting me from the precise timing the sofrito required. "You should show this to Chef Bernard." I tensed slightly. "You think he'd be interested? He barely acknowledges I exist." Marcus turned me to face him, his dark eyes serious beneath perfectly styled hair. 8 months into our relationship, and sometimes I still couldn't believe that he, Portofino's rising star sous chef, had chosen me, a humble line cook who spent most shifts prepping vegetables and making basic sauces. "Bernard's always looking for new signature dishes," Marcus insisted. "This could be your chance to move up. Trust me." I stirred the rice into the fragrant base, watching the grains become translucent at the edges. The recipe was special, my only inheritance from the grandmother who raised me after my parents died. She'd taught me to cook by feeling rather than measuring, to understand the soul of ingredients rather than just their function. "It's a family recipe," I explained, suddenly protective. "My abuela brought it from Valencia. She always said real paella carries the memories of everyone who's ever made it." Marcus chuckled, the sound warm and indulgent. "That's sweet. But this is business, Sophia. Great chefs don't hide their talents." He dipped a spoon into the mixture, his eyes widening as he tasted. "This is honestly better than anything Bernard has on the menu. You're meant for bigger things than being a line cook forever." His confidence was intoxicating. I'd spent years doubting myself, working twice as hard for half the recognition of my male colleagues. Marcus made me believe I could be more. "Maybe you're right," I said, carefully adding the seafood stock. That night, after dinner, Marcus praised the finished paella extravagantly. The pride glowing in his eyes made me feel seen in a way I rarely experienced. We made love on my cramped futon, and afterward, as I drifted toward sleep, I imagined Chef Bernard's impressed face as he tasted my grandmother's recipe, pictured my promotion to sous chef, dreamed of one day having my own restaurant. I didn't notice Marcus carefully photographing pages from my recipe notebook while I slept, the leather-bound gift from my grandmother containing all her culinary secrets. "Stick to your station," Chef Bernard snapped the next day when I nervously suggested a new dish. His French accent thickened with annoyance. "We have systems, Miss Vidal. You don't see the prep cooks inventing sauces, do you?" The other kitchen staff pretended not to hear, but I caught a few exchanging smirks. Heat crawled up my neck as I nodded and returned to chopping mirepoix. Marcus squeezed my shoulder sympathetically as he passed. "He's under pressure with the expansion," he whispered. "Bad timing. I'll talk to him later." That night, I cried in our bed. Technically my bed in my apartment, but Marcus stayed over most nights. The rejection stung more than it should have. Chef Bernard wasn't known for kindness, but I'd hoped the extraordinary flavors of my grandmother's paella might break through his professional indifference. "It's his loss," Marcus said, stroking my hair. "Things will get better, I promise." His words soothed me, and I curled against his chest, inhaling the lingering scent of restaurant kitchen, garlic and butter, and that indefinable aroma of high-end cooking. I trusted him completely. 2 weeks later, I was prepping vegetables when excited whispers spread through the kitchen. Marcus stood beside Chef Bernard at the pass, presenting a copper pan of what was unmistakably paella. The saffron golden rice, the precise arrangement of shrimp, mussels, and calamari, I recognized it immediately. Chef Bernard dipped a spoon into the dish, his perpetual frown transforming into raised eyebrows. This is extraordinary, Marcus. The balance of flavors. He took another bite, closing his eyes. You've been holding out on me. I've been developing it for months, Marcus replied smoothly. A modern interpretation of traditional Spanish paella with some personal innovations. I froze, knife suspended over a half-chopped carrot. The distinctive aroma was unmistakable, my grandmother's secret recipe. The exact proportions of saffron, the special preparation of the sofrito, her unique method of developing the socarrat crust. This wasn't similar to my recipe, it was identical. My knuckles whitened around the chef's knife. Across the kitchen, Marcus caught my eye for a fraction of a second before returning his attention to Bernard, who was practically purring with delight. This could be our signature at the new location, Bernard said. What do you call it? Marcus smiled his perfect camera-ready smile. Seafood Valencia. Valencia, my grandmother's birthplace. He hadn't even bothered to disguise the origin. Later, I confronted him in the dry storage room, my voice shaking. That was my recipe, my grandmother's paella. Marcus laughed, the sound nothing like his usual warm chuckle. It's similar, sure, but I changed enough to make it my own. That's how cooking works, Sophia. He patted my cheek condescendingly. You should be flattered I found inspiration in your family dish. Inspiration? I hissed. You copied it exactly. The technique, the ingredients, even the name references Valencia. His expression hardened. Be careful with accusations, Sophia. No one owns a combination of rice and seafood. He leaned closer, his voice dropping. Besides, who do you think Bernard will believe? His promising sous chef or a line cook he barely notices? The betrayal knocked the air from my lungs. This man I trusted, who'd seen me vulnerable and passionate about my heritage, had stolen the most precious thing I possessed. Not just a recipe. My connection to my grandmother, my culinary birthright. How could you? I whispered. His eyes softened slightly, and for a moment I thought I saw regret. Then he shrugged. It's just business, Sophia, nothing personal. But it was personal. It was everything. The betrayal deepened when Chef Bernard announced that Marcus would become head chef of Portofino's new location, the signature dish that had sealed his promotion. Seafood Valencia, my grandmother's paella. I spent weeks gathering courage, documenting similarities between my recipe and the dish now featured prominently on Portofino's menu. I compiled photos, notes, even witness statements from another line cook who'd heard me describe my family recipe to Marcus months earlier. When I finally approached Chef Bernard, evidence in hand, his dismissal was immediate and crushing. These are serious accusations, Miss Vidal. His tone suggested I was an annoying child rather than a colleague. Marcus has explained that you became emotionally attached to him and are now attempting to claim credit for his work. That's a lie, I protested, pushing my documentation across his desk. Please, just look at this. Bernard slid the papers back without glancing at them. Furthermore, inventory has noted discrepancies in the saffron supply. Marcus suggests you may have been appropriating ingredients. The implication hit me like a physical blow. I've never stolen anything in my life. Nevertheless, given these concerns and your obvious conflict with our new head chef, I think it's best we part ways. He slid a final paycheck across the desk. No need to finish your shift. Security escorted me out the service entrance. No goodbyes, no chance to clear my name. Through the kitchen windows, I caught a glimpse of Marcus watching, his expression unreadable. The rain soaked through my thin jacket as I clutched my knife roll, the only thing I'd been allowed to take, and wondered how my life had collapsed so completely. In the following weeks, I learned just how thoroughly Marcus had orchestrated my destruction. My calls to other restaurants went unreturned. Former colleagues avoided me. Someone, I could guess who, had spread rumors that I was unstable, a thief, unprofessional. My culinary dreams seemed dead, killed by the man I'd trusted with my heart and my heritage. The final blow came 6 months later. I'd found work at an upscale catering company, far below my skills, but the only place that would hire me. A last-minute staffing shortage meant I was assigned to serve at an engagement party in a mansion overlooking the city. I didn't know whose event it was until I arrived, wearing the catering company's standard black pants and white shirt, my hair tucked under a cap. When Marcus walked into the room beside Daniela Merisi, Portofino owner Richard Merisi's daughter and my former friend who had introduced us, my serving tray nearly slipped from my fingers. And they were engaged. Marcus and Daniela, his perfect calculated career move. I managed to avoid him for most of the evening, keeping my head down, focusing on not spilling drinks or dropping hors d'oeuvres. But inevitably, I found myself serving their table as Richard Merisi raised a toast. "To my beautiful daughter and her brilliant fiancé," he proclaimed, champagne glinting in the chandelier light. "Marcus, your Seafood Valencia has made our restaurant the talk of the city. The critics can't stop raving." Daniela leaned into Marcus, radiating pride. "My father says we'll open 3 more locations next year based on its popularity alone." As I set down fresh champagne flutes, my shaking hands betrayed me. A splash of liquid hit Daniela's designer dress, and she looked up, irritation transforming to shock as she recognized me. "Sophia, what are you doing here?" The table fell silent. Marcus's expression flashed from surprise to calculation to manufactured concern. "I'm working," I said quietly, dabbing at her dress with a napkin. "Just like I was working when I created the recipe Marcus claims is his." Richard Merisi frowned. "What is she talking about, Marcus?" Before he could respond, the words burst from me, all the truth I'd been silenced from telling. "Seafood Valencia is my grandmother's paella recipe. He stole it from me when we were dating. He watched me make it, photographed my family cookbook, then claimed it as his own creation." Daniela's perfect features contorted with disdain. "Oh, honey, are you still telling that story? Everyone knows Marcus created that dish." "It's my family's recipe," I insisted, voice rising. "From Valencia, hence the convenient name he gave it." Marcus placed a calming hand on Richard's arm. "I'm so sorry about this, Richard. Sophia and I dated briefly. When things ended, she became fixated on the idea that my recipe was somehow hers." He gave me a pitying look that made my blood boil. "I thought she'd moved on." "This is inappropriate," Richard snapped, gesturing to the catering manager. "Remove this employee immediately." Security escorted me out, again, as I shouted the truth, my former colleagues watching with embarrassment or amusement. The catering manager fired me on the spot, apologizing profusely to the Marises for the disruption. As the mansion's ornate doors closed behind me, something inside me hardened into resolve. Marcus had taken my recipe, my reputation, my career, but he couldn't take my knowledge or my heritage. Somehow, someday, I would reclaim what was rightfully mine. I just didn't know how. 1 year later, I was working at a grocery store deli counter, my culinary dreams seemingly dead. My tiny studio apartment was a far cry from the restaurant kitchen I'd once hoped to run. My hands, once capable of the most delicate knife work, now sliced processed meats and scooped potato salad for distracted customers. On my break, I flipped through a food magazine someone had left behind, freezing, when I saw Marcus's smiling face beside a feature on Portofino's expansion. The article praised his innovative seafood paella that combines traditional Spanish techniques with modern flair. Word for word how my grandmother had described her cooking philosophy to me years ago. The magazine slipped from my fingers. 3 new Portofino locations had opened. Marcus and Daniela had married in a culinary celebration featured in several publications. His stolen recipe, my inheritance, had made him wealthy and acclaimed while I served bologna to impatient shoppers. That night, in my dingy studio apartment, I sobbed into a pillow that smelled of bleach and despair. The walls were thin enough that I could hear my neighbor's television through them, some cooking competition where ambitious chefs pursued their dreams. Dreams I'd abandoned. At some point during that dark night, I reached under my bed for the box containing the few precious items I'd kept from my grandmother. Among them, her recipe notebook, hidden away since the betrayal. I'd been too heartbroken to open it, each recipe a reminder of what I'd lost. This time, I forced myself to look through it, tracing her handwriting with my fingertip, smelling the faint scent of saffron that still clung to some pages. And there, tucked inside the back cover, I found something I'd missed, a letter written in my grandmother's flowing script. Mi querida Sofia, if you are reading this, I am gone and you have found your way back to our family's culinary heritage. Perhaps you already know that before coming to America, I was known in Valencia. My restaurant, La Corona, earned a Michelin star in 1972, one of the first women in Spain to receive such an honor. What you don't know is that I left more than recipes for you. There is an account at Banco de Valencia, details enclosed. I established it before leaving Spain, adding to it over the years. It is for when you are ready to claim your legacy. Cooking is not just about feeding bodies, it is about nourishing souls and preserving history. Our recipes carry the stories of our people. Guard them wisely, and when the time comes, share them proudly. Con todo mi amor, Abuela Elena. Enclosed was a bank account number, access codes, and contact information for a lawyer in Valencia. My hands trembled as I read and reread the letter. My grandmother, quiet, humble Elena Vidal, who had worked as a school cafeteria cook in America, had been a celebrated chef in Spain. And she'd left me more than recipes. She'd left me a way back. For the first time since Marcus's betrayal, I felt hope-stirring. 6 months later, after liquidating my grandmother's account and selling my few possessions, I stepped off a plane in Valencia, Spain. The warm Mediterranean breeze carried scents of saffron and the sea. I'd spent months learning Spanish, researching Valencia's culinary scene, and corresponding with my grandmother's lawyer, Jorge Navarro. He met me at a small cafe near the harbor, a distinguished man in his 70s with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. "Señorita Vidal," he greeted me, standing as I approached. "At last we meet. You have your grandmother's eyes." We settled at a table overlooking boats bobbing in the harbor. Navarro ordered coffee and pastries, then pulled documents from his leather briefcase. "Your grandmother was a remarkable woman," he said. "When she left Spain in 1975, many of us thought it was temporary. But she built a new life in America, always maintaining her connections here." "I had no idea," I admitted. "She never spoke of her success." Navarro nodded thoughtfully. "Elena was private about her achievements, but she never stopped planning for your future." He explained that my grandmother had owned not just her restaurant, but the building and 3 others on the block. Prime Valencia real estate now worth millions. She'd left extensive documentation of her recipes and techniques, officially registered with Spain's Culinary Heritage Office. "Your paella recipe wasn't just a family secret," Navarro explained, sliding a formal-looking certificate across the table. "It was legally protected intellectual property in Europe." I stared at the document dated 1970. Proof, official legal proof, that the recipe Marcus had claimed was his, had belonged to my family for decades. "Can this help me reclaim it in America?" I asked, hope swelling. Navarro's expression grew cautious. "International culinary copyright is complex, but—" He tapped the document. "This is a foundation we can build upon." As we finished our coffee, Navarro suggested we visit my grandmother's former restaurant. A short walk through Valencia's winding streets brought us to a colorful building with Bar Turista emblazoned on its awning. "This was La Corona?" I asked, disappointment evident in my voice. The tourist bar looked nothing like the elegant restaurant I'd imagined. "Ah, no," Navarro smiled. "This is merely what occupies the ground floor now. Your grandmother's restaurant space has been preserved as it was. It's upstairs." He led me through a side entrance and up a narrow staircase. Using an old key, he unlocked a door that opened into a time capsule, a 1970s fine dining restaurant, dusty but intact. Crystal chandeliers hung over elegant tables. The kitchen, visible through a service window, contained vintage equipment alongside modern innovations that would have been ahead of their time. "She never sold it," Navarro explained, "paid taxes and maintenance fees for decades, waiting for you to claim it." I moved through the space in a daze, touching tablecloths, wine glasses, kitchen implements that my grandmother had once used. In her office, I found shelves of notebooks, decades of recipe development, technique refinement, culinary experiments. She documented everything, Navarro said, watching me examine the treasure trove. And she registered her most important creations with the proper authorities. As the setting sun cast golden light through the restaurant's windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air, I felt my grandmother's presence surrounding me. This wasn't just an inheritance of money and property. It was a legacy of knowledge, innovation, and cultural heritage. Senor Navarro, I said, my voice steady with newfound determination, I'm going to need your help with something more than real estate. With my newfound resources, I hired Spain's top food scientists to break down the chemical composition of my grandmother's paella, creating a patentable flavor fingerprint technology that could detect specific recipe signatures in prepared food. The technology was revolutionary, identifying not just ingredients but cooking methods and timing through molecular analysis. I invested in developing a portable version, disguised as jewelry, a pendant that could scan food discreetly, sending data to a secure server for analysis. Simultaneously, I enrolled in Spain's most prestigious culinary institute, refining my skills under master chefs while studying international food copyright law. My days were filled with learning, my nights with planning. I was no longer the timid line cook desperate for validation. I was becoming someone new, someone capable of reclaiming what was stolen. 3 months before returning to America, I launched my silent counterattack. Using my mother's maiden name, Santos, which Marcus had never known, I reached out to Richard Marisi, Portofino's owner, from an untraceable email account. Dear Mr. Marisi, I represent a European investment group impressed with your restaurants, particularly interested in international expansion rights for your famous seafood paella. Our principals are prepared to discuss an 8-figure investment but require verification of recipe origin for European market compatibility. Please contact me to arrange a meeting. Cordially, Sofia Santos, Acquisition Specialist, Mediterranean Culinary Ventures. Though clearly suspicious, Richard responded within hours. The mention of an 8-figure investment was too tempting to ignore. We arranged a meeting in Madrid the following month. In a sleek conference room overlooking the city, I greeted Richard wearing a disguise subtle enough that he wouldn't recognize me from our brief encounters during my Portofino days. Different hairstyle, colored contacts, slightly accented English. I presented myself as Sofia Santos, representing phantom European investors. Mr. Marisi, thank you for coming all this way, I said, offering my hand. I'm authorized to begin serious discussions. But first, our legal team has some concerns about recipe authentication. Richard frowned. Authentication? I explained my proprietary authentication technology that could verify original recipe ownership, presenting it as a tool to protect his international interests. Culinary theft is taken much more seriously in Europe. The penalties can be quite severe. I slid a brochure across the table. Before investing, we need to verify the paella recipe is truly original to your restaurant. This seems excessive, Richard protested. The recipe is obviously ours. Then you have nothing to worry about, I replied smoothly. Our authentication is merely a formality, standard procedure for international expansion. Once verified, we can proceed with investment discussions. The prospect of European expansion and millions in investment proved too appealing. Richard signed the testing agreement, granting permission for my company to analyze seafood Valencia using samples from all Portofino locations. 2 weeks later, Richard received my report. The seafood paella recipe matched one registered in Spain decades ago by Elena Vidal, protected under EU law. My attorneys suggested the possibility of working around this unfortunate situation through licensing rather than legal action. The report was carefully crafted to seem like an unfortunate discovery by a still interested investor rather than a deliberate trap. But the legal implications were clear. Portofino had been profiting from stolen intellectual property, vulnerable to significant damages under European law. Richard's response was immediate and panicked. A flurry of emails demanding explanations, threatening legal action, finally requesting a phone call to sort this misunderstanding. I allowed him to stew for 3 days before arranging a conference call. This is absurd, he blustered. Our chef developed this recipe himself. The evidence suggests otherwise, I replied calmly. The molecular fingerprint is identical to a recipe registered by Elena Vidal in 1970. The geographical name Valencia further supports the connection. Our authentication process is legally defensible and scientifically sound. Richard's voice lowered. What do you want? Money? My clients still see potential in partnership, Mr. Marisi, but they cannot risk legal complications. If you were to secure proper licensing from the Vidal estate and provide appropriate attribution, perhaps we could proceed. The Vidal estate? He repeated. Who the hell is that? I believe your chef may know, I suggested. Perhaps you should ask him how he developed his signature dish. The call ended with Richard promising to investigate and respond within the week. I disconnected, imagining the confrontation occurring between Richard and Marcus at that very moment. After years of benefiting from my grandmother's stolen recipe, Marcus would finally face consequences. I poured myself a glass of Spanish wine, satisfaction warming my chest. Phase 1 of my plan was complete. The trap was set, and Marcus had walked right into it. Back in America, my reinvention continued. I used some of my inheritance to buy a small but elegant test kitchen in the trendy district where Portofino operated. I established Vidal Culinary Authentication, marketing my technology to high-end restaurants concerned about recipe theft. The real purpose? Positioning myself for the next phase of revenge while building a legitimate business. My grandmother's notebooks had provided more than recipes. They'd revealed her pioneering work in flavor science, decades ahead of molecular gastronomy trends. Her research, combined with modern technology, created authentication capabilities that genuinely impressed culinary experts. One evening, my office phone rang. Marcus, voice tight with controlled panic. Yes, this is Vidal Authentication, I answered, disguising my voice slightly. I hear you're the person to talk to about recipe authentication issues. His familiar voice sent an unexpected jolt through me. I'm having a situation that requires discretion. We specialize in discretion, mister. Salgado, Marcus Salgado, head chef at Portofino. I agreed to meet him the next day, ending the call before emotion could betray me. Then I sat in my office, heart pounding as conflicting feelings warred within me. Satisfaction that my plan was working, anger still fresh after years, and underneath it all, the ghost of what I'd once felt for him. The next day, the man who stole everything from me sat across my conference table, not recognizing me with my new sophisticated look, Spanish-influenced style, and confidence he'd never seen in the insecure line cook he'd betrayed. Thank you for meeting on such short notice, Miss Santos, he began, using the name I'd given when setting the appointment. Years of success had added polish to his appearance. Designer watch, tailored suit, the confident posture of a celebrated chef. But stress had etched new lines around his eyes. My situation is somewhat delicate. Most authentication issues are, I replied neutrally, activating the recording device hidden in my desk. Why don't you explain the problem? Marcus explained his delicate situation, a claim against his signature recipe. I listened sympathetically while secretly recording. He admitted the recipe may have been inspired by a former colleague, but insisted he transformed it significantly. This former colleague, I prompted, tell me about them. Marcus waved dismissively. Just some line cook with delusions of grandeur. We dated briefly. She had this family recipe she was precious about, but honestly, what I created was entirely different level. Professional versus home cooking. I felt the old pain, but now it fueled me rather than defeated me. And this line cook's name? Sofia Vidal. He frowned slightly. Something about you reminds me of her, actually. I kept my expression pleasantly blank. I get that a lot. Common features in Spanish heritage. I opened a folder, redirecting his attention. There are solutions to your situation, Mr. Salgado. First, we authenticate the recipe against worldwide databases to establish uniqueness. If there are similarities to protected recipes, we pursue licensing arrangements. Relief visibly washed over him. So you could prove my recipe is original? Or at least different enough? We can certainly try, I said, sliding a contract across the table. Our standard agreement. Once signed, we begin the authentication process immediately. Marcus signed without reading the fine print, a clause acknowledging that if his recipe derived from another source, he forfeited rights to authentication evidence gathered. He left my office relieved, thinking he'd found an ally. 2 days later, I visited Portofino during a dinner service, my authentication pendant around my neck actually scanning each plate of paella. The technology confirmed what I already knew. It was identical to my grandmother's recipe, down to the molecular level. I accessed the restaurant's order system through the staff tablet left carelessly at the hostess station, gathering sales data showing Seafood Valencia accounted for 40% of Portofino's revenue, and I delivered my report to Richard directly, bypassing Marcus. The evidence was irrefutable. The recipe was stolen, registered to my grandmother decades before Marcus claimed to create it. The sales data revealed the extent to which Portofino had profited from intellectual theft, approximately $2.3 million over 3 years. My attorney presented two options: a lengthy public legal battle that would devastate Portofino's reputation, or a private settlement including recipe licensing fees, back payments, and mandatory creator attribution. Richard's face purpled with rage as he digested the information. "This is extortion." "This is intellectual property law," my attorney corrected mildly. "The evidence is conclusive and admissible. The choice is yours, Mr. Marisi, but I advise you to consider the publicity implications." 3 hours later, Richard summoned Marcus to the restaurant during prep time. I watched from a corner table, unrecognized in large sunglasses and a scarf, as Richard exploded at Marcus in front of the entire staff. "You stole it! You stole the recipe that built our expansion?" Richard's voice echoed through the dining room. "Do you have any idea the legal position you've put us in?" Marcus stammered, his composure cracking. "I borrowed some ideas, but I improved it." "Borrowed." Richard slammed a copy of my report on the table. "The molecular analysis shows it's identical to a recipe registered in Spain 50 years ago." Daniela, now Marcus's wife and the restaurant's manager, watched in horror as her husband's deception unraveled their empire. "Marcus, tell me this isn't true," she pleaded. Marcus's gaze darted around the room, looking for escape. Finding none, his shoulders slumped. "I may have adapted it more directly than I said." "From whom?" Richard demanded. The moment stretched as Marcus realized the depth of his predicament. "Sofia Vidal," he finally admitted. "She was a line cook here. We dated for a while." "The same Sofia Vidal who caused a scene at your engagement party?" Daniela's voice rose hysterically. "The one you said was delusional?" I slipped out before Marcus could respond, satisfaction warming me. The first phase of justice had been served. As Marcus headed to his car that night, I stepped from the shadows of the parking garage. "Hello, Marcus." He froze, recognition and fear washing over his face. In the harsh fluorescent light, he looked smaller somehow, less imposing than the man who had once dominated my world. "You? This was all you?" His voice cracked slightly. I smiled, holding up my authentication pendant. "My grandmother had more faith in me than you did." I explained exactly how I'd outmaneuvered him, watching realization destroy his arrogance. The European property, the authentication technology, the legal protection my grandmother had established decades ago. "Sophia, listen," he began, stepping toward me. "We can fix this. We can work together, split the profits, co-credit on the recipe." "Don't embarrass yourself," I said quietly. "The settlement is being drafted now. You'll be required to credit Elena Vidal on all menus and marketing materials. And you'll pay licensing fees for every dish you've ever served using her recipe." His expression hardened, desperation replaced by calculation. "You think anyone will care? It's my name on the restaurants, my face in the magazines. A footnote won't change that." "Perhaps not," I conceded. "But every time you make your famous paella, you'll know the truth. And so will I." He tried bargaining, then threatening, finally begging, offering to split profits to credit me publicly. I simply turned and walked away, his desperate calls echoing behind me. No compromise, no forgiveness. Not yet. This was just the beginning. 6 months later, the settlement with Portofino was finalized. All menu items featuring my grandmother's recipes now carried her name. I received 30% of all related profits retroactively and ongoing. The financial vindication was satisfying, but my revenge wasn't complete. The final target, Daniela, who chose to believe Marcus over our friendship, who mocked my claims and watched me be humiliated. Through industry contacts, I learned Daniela had used her portion of the settlement to open her own boutique catering company, separate from her father's restaurants. Her specialty, fusion tapas for elite clients. The business was struggling to establish its reputation, fighting the shadow of the Portofino scandal. Through my now successful authentication business, I arranged to certify recipes for a major food festival where Daniela was showcasing her new brand. She didn't recognize the company name, didn't connect it to me. The festival was held in an upscale hotel ballroom featuring 50 top chefs competing for industry attention and awards. Daniela's booth was elegantly appointed, her staff impeccably trained. She moved among potential clients with practiced charm, offering samples of her signature tapas. I approached in my capacity as authentication expert, clipboard in hand. Miss Salgado, I'm from Vidal Authentication, conducting standard festival verification. She barely glanced at me, focused on arranging plates. Fine, whatever, just make it quick. I scanned her signature dishes with my pendant, confirming my suspicion. 3 more stolen recipes from my grandmother's notebook, which Marcus had photographed completely. Recipes I hadn't even developed yet when working at Portofino, proving the theft had been premeditated and extensive. Rather than confronting Daniela immediately, I approached the festival organizers with my findings. As a certified culinary authentication expert, my evidence prompted them to disqualify Daniela's entries just before final judging. The scene was painfully public. Festival security approached her booth during peak hours, requesting that her staff remove her table. Confused attendees watched as Daniela argued with officials, her voice rising as they explained the disqualification. "This is ridiculous," she protested. "These are original recipes." The head judge, a renowned chef with impeccable credentials, shook his head. "The authentication results are conclusive. These dishes are registered to another creator." Whispers spread through the culinary community as Daniela's staff packed up, her face flushed with humiliation. Her carefully orchestrated debut crumbled before my eyes, just as my career had crumbled years earlier. The following week, I released a white paper through my company about the ethics of recipe development, featuring anonymized but recognizable case studies of culinary theft, including Daniela's. Food journalists picked up the story, investigating the festival incident. Within days, the scandal was featured in culinary blogs and industry newsletters. "Rising caterer disqualified for recipe plagiarism," read one headline. Though I'd been careful not to name Daniela directly in my report, the industry was small enough that connections were quickly made. Her fledgling business faced a credibility crisis before it was truly launched. I watched the fallout from a distance, monitoring industry chatter without directly engaging. The satisfaction I expected to feel was strangely muted. Yes, Daniela was experiencing the professional humiliation she'd once watched me endure. But revenge, I was discovering, provided diminishing returns. The first victory over Marcus had been exhilarating. This one felt hollow. Perhaps I was evolving beyond the need for revenge. Or perhaps I was simply saving my energy for bigger battles. Either way, I found myself more focused on growing my authentication business than on Daniela's struggles. During this unfolding scandal, I received an unexpected call from Spain. The number wasn't Jorge Navarro's, but the country code was familiar. "Miss Vidal, this is Elena Rodriguez." The name meant nothing to me at first. Then she continued. "I was your grandmother's sous chef at La Corona in Valencia. I've seen your authentication company featured in Gastronomia magazine." My breath caught, a living connection to my grandmother's professional life. Someone who had known her not as the humble immigrant raising an orphaned granddaughter, but as Chef Vidal, a culinary innovator. "I would very much like to meet you," Elena Rodriguez continued. "There are things about your grandmother's work you should know." 2 weeks later, I welcomed Elena to my test kitchen in America. She was in her 70s, but carried herself with a chef's posture, straight-backed, observant, hands steady as she examined my equipment. "Your grandmother would be proud," she said, surveying my workspace. "But not surprised. She always said you had her gift." We spent the afternoon cooking together, Elena sharing stories of La Corona's golden days. How my grandmother had mentored women chefs in an era when kitchens were male domains. How critics had initially dismissed her innovations before eventually recognizing her genius. As sunset painted my kitchen walls amber, Elena finally revealed why she had sought me out. "Your authentication technology," she said. "It's built on your grandmother's research, isn't it?" I nodded cautiously. I found her notebooks. Her flavor profiling work was decades ahead of its time. Elena smiled. She called it chemical memory, the idea that flavors have distinctive patterns as unique as fingerprints. But there was more to her work than recipes. Over herbal tea, Elena revealed the full story. My grandmother hadn't just owned a Michelin-starred restaurant. She was a culinary pioneer who developed a systematic approach to flavor profiling decades before molecular gastronomy became famous. So, in the early 1970s, your grandmother consulted with food scientists at the university, Elena explained. She was developing what she called universal flavor theory, the idea that all culinary traditions share fundamental principles that can be identified and replicated. Elena explained that my grandmother fled Spain after business rivals threatened her when she refused to sell her techniques. The powerful men who controlled Spain's culinary establishment couldn't accept that a woman had revolutionized their field. When she wouldn't sell her research, they tried to destroy her. So she came to America and became nobody? I asked, struggling to reconcile the humble grandmother I'd known with this culinary revolutionary. She became your grandmother, Elena corrected gently, and she preserved her life's work for you. The inheritance wasn't just about money and property, it was her life's work. Revolutionary culinary science that was decades ahead of its time. The authentication technology I thought I'd pioneered was actually building on my grandmother's existing research, hidden in coded notes I hadn't fully deciphered. There's more, Elena said, pulling a small leather journal from her bag. This is your grandmother's personal diary from the years before she left Spain. The parts about her research are written in a code we developed together. I believe you'll find it illuminates your current work. With Elena's help, I began accessing the complete archives of my grandmother's work. What I uncovered was astonishing. She'd developed a comprehensive theory of flavor that modern science was only now beginning to understand. Her approach to cooking had been almost mathematical in its precision, identifying patterns across diverse culinary traditions. This revelation coincided with a major food conglomerate offering to buy my authentication technology for $40 million. The technology I'd developed to exact revenge had turned out to be genuinely revolutionary, with applications far beyond catching recipe thieves. I now faced a choice: focus on completing my revenge against those who wronged me, or embrace my grandmother's true legacy and revolutionize culinary science. The power was entirely mine now, financially, legally, and morally. Elena watched me processing this revelation, her eyes kind but challenging. Your grandmother could have used her work to punish those who threatened her. Instead, she preserved it for future innovation. What will you do with your power, Sophia? It was a question I couldn't immediately answer, but I knew the path forward would require more than the anger that had fueled me thus far. My decision crystallized when Marcus and Daniela requested a meeting, together. After weeks of declining their increasingly desperate calls, I finally agreed to see them in my office. We convened in my sleek conference room overlooking the city, my grandmother's notebook displayed prominently on my desk. They entered nervously, both looking diminished. Marcus had lost his executive chef position at the new Portofino location. Daniela's catering business was struggling under the cloud of scandal. "Thank you for seeing us," Marcus began, attempting confidence he clearly didn't feel. "We appreciate your time." I gestured for them to sit, saying nothing. The silence stretched uncomfortably until Daniela broke it. "Your authentication technology is incredible," she said. "The entire industry is talking about it. You've really transformed the culinary landscape." I arched an eyebrow. "Is that why you're here? Professional admiration?" Marcus leaned forward. "We're here because it's time to move past old grievances. You've made your point." He attempted a winning smile that once would have melted my defenses. Now it seemed merely pathetic. "We should discuss how to move forward productively." Daniela nodded eagerly, adding, "This industry is all about relationships. We all made mistakes, but surely we can find a solution that benefits everyone." The audacity of their approach, suggesting we were equals in this situation, nearly made me laugh. I remained silent, watching them grow increasingly uncomfortable. Finally, I asked, "Do you know why my grandmother's paella was special?" They exchanged confused glances. "The saffron ratio?" Marcus guessed. It wasn't just ingredients or technique, I continued as if he hadn't spoken. It was about honor. Each dish carried the honor of generations who perfected it. When you stole it, you didn't just take a recipe, you tried to steal my heritage. Marcus attempted remorse, his expression practiced. I was ambitious and took a shortcut I shouldn't have. But look what's come of it, your technology, your success. He gestured around my elegant office. In a way, I did you a favor. The sheer audacity stopped my breath for a moment. Before I could respond, Daniela quickly added, we could be an incredible team. Your recipes, Marcus's restaurant experience, my client connections, the past is past. I studied them, these people who had caused me so much pain, now seeking to benefit from my success. Once, I would have done anything for their approval, their acceptance. Now I saw them clearly for what they were, opportunists without vision or integrity. My response was calm but devastating. 3 years ago, I would have forgiven you. I would have accepted any small acknowledgement, any genuine apology. I would have shared everything freely if you'd simply asked and respected the source. I slid a document across the table, a comprehensive analysis of how my grandmother's techniques could revolutionize their businesses if licensed properly. This is what partnership would have looked like, I explained. This is what you threw away for a shortcut to success. Marcus reached for the document eagerly, seeing a potential lifeline, but I slid it back before his fingers touched it. That opportunity no longer exists. Daniela's composure cracked first. What do you want? Money? Public apology? Your name in lights? Just tell us so we can end this. Her voice echoed against the office windows, desperation evident. Marcus placed a restraining hand on her arm, still trying to maintain control of the situation. I want nothing from you, I replied simply. That's what you fail to understand. I don't need your money, your connections, your approval, or even your remorse. I've moved beyond you both. I stood, indicating the meeting was over. My attorneys will handle any further communication regarding licensing violations. Daniela began crying, mascara tracing dark paths down her cheeks. You're destroying us out of spite. This isn't fair. Her accusation hung in the air between us. Once it would have made me doubt myself, make me question whether I was being unreasonable. Now I recognized it for what it was. Manipulation from someone who had never faced consequences for her actions. Fair? I repeated quietly. Was it fair when you watched security escort me from your engagement party while I tried to tell the truth? Was it fair when you told people I was delusional? Was it fair when you used recipes from my grandmother's notebook for your catering launch? She paled. I didn't know. Didn't you? I interrupted. Or didn't you care to know? Marcus attempted one last negotiation. Name your price, everyone has one. I walked to the door, holding it open. That's the difference between us. You've always seen recipes as commodities to be bought and sold. I see them as legacy. You can't afford what you took from me. As they left, defeated and angry, I felt no triumph, no satisfaction. Only a quiet certainty that I'd honored my grandmother by refusing to value her legacy in the terms they understood. Their protests faded down the hallway as I returned to my desk, opening my grandmother's notebook to a page I'd only recently decoded. Her vision for using food science to address global nutrition challenges. The work ahead was far more important than the wounds behind me. 2 years later, I stood on the terrace of a restored villa in Valencia, the Mediterranean breeze carrying the scent of orange blossoms and distant sea salt. Below me spread the culinary school I'd established in my grandmother's name, where students from around the world learned not just cooking techniques, but the science and ethics of food innovation. In my hand, a letter from Marcus, his third attempt at reconciliation. This one more humble than previous efforts. He was working as a line cook again, starting over after the scandal permanently damaged his reputation. Daniela had left the culinary world entirely. I didn't feel anger anymore when I saw his name, just a distant acknowledgement of a painful chapter closed. I placed the unopened letter in a drawer with the others. Elena Rodriguez, my grandmother's former sous chef now in her 70s, called to me from inside the villa. She'd become a mentor and friend, helping me understand not just my grandmother's research, but her philosophy. Elena was teaching today's advanced class in traditional Spanish techniques, her knowledge keeping my grandmother's direct influence alive. Since partnering with her, I'd discovered dozens more family recipes and techniques, each one a thread connecting me to my roots. The original restaurant space now housed a research kitchen where we explored my grandmother's theories, proving their validity with modern scientific methods. Rather than selling my authentication technology, I'd established the Vidal Culinary Heritage Foundation, developing ways to protect traditional recipes from exploitation while ensuring cultural culinary knowledge was preserved and properly attributed. The technology now served its true purpose, protecting legacy rather than monetizing it. In my professional kitchen that evening, I prepared my grandmother's paella for the school's annual celebration. Each ingredient connected me to her. The saffron threads delicate between my fingers, the seafood arranged in the pattern she taught me. The ritual of cooking this dish now brought peace rather than painful memories. A student from Brazil asked me about the socarrat, the prized, crusty bottom layer of the paella. As I explained my grandmother's technique for achieving perfect caramelization without burning, I realized how much joy I now found in sharing knowledge freely, without fear of theft or betrayal. During the celebration, I was approached by a young chef whose family recipes were nearly lost when a corporation attempted to patent traditional techniques from her Indonesian village. My foundation had helped her community establish legal protection for their culinary heritage. "You've changed how the world sees food ownership," she told me, emotion making her voice catch. "In my village, they say your name with reverence." Her words touched me deeply. This was the true vindication, not punishing those who had wronged me, but protecting others from similar exploitation. Later, I walked alone along the beach near my grandmother's childhood home, the same shores where she gathered seafood for her earliest experiments with paella. The sun set over the water, painting the horizon in shades of saffron and amber, colors that filled my professional life but now brought comfort rather than conflict. I thought about how revenge once consumed me, how I channeled that energy into reclaiming what was stolen. But the true rebirth wasn't in wealth or vindication. It was in discovering my place in a legacy larger than myself. My phone buzzed with a message from my research team, a breakthrough in our project to make nutritionally complete meals accessible in food-insecure regions, using my grandmother's flavor science to make basic ingredients more satisfying. The real triumph wasn't making Marcus and Daniela pay for their betrayal. It was transforming their theft into something they could never have imagined or achieved. A culinary movement that prioritized heritage and ethics alongside innovation. The revenge I once craved seemed small compared to the legacy I was now building. As darkness fell over the Mediterranean, I made my way back to the villa, where lights glowed warmly from windows and the sounds of conversation and laughter spilled into the garden. Tomorrow, culinary students would learn my grandmother's techniques. Her recipes would nourish another generation. Her name, our name, would be spoken with respect. I paused at the threshold, remembering the small apartment kitchen where Marcus watched me prepare paella years ago. How limited my vision had been then, how desperate for approval. The woman I am now, confident, purposeful, at peace, would be unrecognizable to that earlier self. Not because of wealth or success, but because I finally understood what my grandmother knew all along. That food is memory, connection, identity. And some things cannot be stolen if you carry them in your heart. The satisfying crunch of expensive leather shoes against imported Italian tile floors now seemed a distant memory, a moment when revenge had felt like the ultimate victory. But the true victory had come later, in the countless moments of creation, preservation, and sharing that honored my grandmother's true legacy. I stepped into the warmth of the villa, closing the door on the darkening sea and opening myself to the future that awaited. A future built not on retribution, but on the sustaining power of heritage reclaimed and wisdom shared.